So the legislation is to be reviewed this year. That's a legal requirement that is in the legislation. And I'm going to ask one of our speakers in a minute to talk about why it's necessary to do that and why it's necessary for us to get involved and to make this review effective and to get what we actually fought for. But one of the reasons this meeting and others like it are being held is because there's quite a strong anti-choice presence mustering itself in the form of online meetings, in the form of protests outside hospitals, and in the form of lobbying to government. And those people are revving up to make this review very restrictive and negative and try to row back on some of the rights that we won. So the Abortion Rights Campaign and the Organisation Together for Safety and several other organisations like the Alliance for Choice are having events to try to get people back involved and kind of help people to discuss what needs to happen and stuff. But the other reason this is happening is because everyone is still kind of reeling after the repeal referendum, and it feels necessary to talk about what worked and what didn't work, why we are where we are today and where we actually are, and how we can mind each other going forward. So we have three speakers who are all amazing, and others, I'm not going to go on about how amazing they are, but just so you know, amazing. Majo Rivas is a member of the Cork Together for Yes campaign. She was a legal expert for us. She's a human rights lawyer with all sorts of expertise that she's going to disavow now. But she was an absolute kingpin for us, and she continues to be an absolute legend in human rights law and human rights work. Louise O'Neill, who you guys will know is an incredible novelist and columnist with the Irish Examiner, and also incredible fashionista, to just say that. And her book and the play that came from it, Asking for It, I think, ripped us all to shreds in the most important way in the kind of aftermath of the referendum. Louise was an incredible worker and canvasser for West Cork Together for Yes during the referendum campaign. And then we have Tara Flynn, who again everybody knows because she's amazing. Tara was absolutely incredible in the referendum campaign, and has been incredible in other human rights campaigns like the marriage equality campaign. And as well as that is I'm cursing already. I hope that's okay with everyone. I can't help it. She's a fucking fabulous comedian and a fabulous writer. Um, so I'm going to go first to Majo, and Majo is going to speak a little bit about the review stuff that I talked about, and then I'm going to kind of open up to our three speakers to talk a bit about, as I say, what worked and what didn't work in the campaign, and literally anything else you guys want to say, because this is really kind of these are listening events. It's not like we're going to come out of them with solutions, but it feels necessary to talk to each other and to listen to each other. And just to hold that listening space. So Majo,
Hey,
hello.
hello. So I will start with these are my opinions and not that of those of my employer, because I think I have to say that at any point. Look, I think I don't look. I've law degrees, but I would never consider myself the legal eagle in these cases. Like normally, I'm quite because of my work. I'm normally very interested in terms of, look, the law can say what it says, but it often when it's implemented on the ground, it's quite different, or it's not necessarily very obvious from when you're legislating for something. These are things that can happen because of how systems interact with each other. So I guess when I was like the fact that we have a review, I think it's good. But when I was putting my list of things that I wanted to bring up, because I had to write a list, I was like, I wrote down this list and I was like, I feel like this was such a deja vu. Like I feel like I told this to my TDs when they were legislating back in 2018. Like when I was thinking, like, look, the 3-day wait is shit. The 2 appointments is shit. Conscientious objection, the 12-week limit, the inadequate provisions for terminations for medical reasons. All of these things were things that we already saw that were just like really problematic in 2018. And when I was writing this list, I was like, I don't think I came up with anything that's new. There are a few things that I think are worse in terms of how things are being implemented, and because of the pandemic, things are, I think it's perhaps made things a bit more transparent in terms of the barriers that are there and how that affects people. But I don't think anything of what I put on my list is new at all. Like we knew that the legislation wasn't perfect and it wasn't enough. And I think a lot of the barriers that were there 3 years ago are still there. And perhaps now we have, maybe different examples. Like I think if we're thinking about even right now in terms of the pandemic, like no one should travel. Like no one should travel ever. It affects migrants differently, and I think that is a very, very real. And I think we talked about that even, when right after the referendum it had passed back then. I remember I had said, look, what happens if you're after the 12 weeks? What happens if, for whatever reason, you cannot access within the time frame, or you need it but they're not certifying it for medical reasons? If you have to travel, being a migrant, the barriers are exactly the same. So like, look, if you need a visa for the UK, you're still going to need a visa for the UK. If you are an asylum seeker, you still have to get permission from the minister. And as far as I'm aware, the Department of Justice normally, like, they're relatively okay. Like, I think when people have asked for permission, they've given that. But the fact that you have to say, I need to travel because of healthcare, and normally you have to give evidence of the type of healthcare because it's not available here. That you want, it's not just that you want to get an eye surgery in the UK or something that's available here. Like, it is a very, you have to disclose all of this information, and all of these things. Like, there shouldn't be stigma about abortion, but the fact that you have to give that information, and that you have to do that again and again and again, like that was there 3 years ago. It's still there now. And I guess, it's the same thing, like if you live in poverty, if you're disabled, if there are accessibility issues, if you have to travel in places where there isn't public transport, it's still the same. Like, things haven't gone any better in the last 3 years. And look, and I guess maybe we can talk about it later on. Like, there are very, very specific barriers to people who are migrants. Like, I don't know if people know, but I think the one difference maybe that was there, that wasn't there 3 years ago, was that some people in direct provision, not everyone can work now. Some people can get a permission to work. That means that they may have a bit more income, but significantly people are still living in poverty. Access to the labor market is still an issue. So it's not that you necessarily have the money to go and buy your ticket to go and get an abortion, because like the traveling, it's not covered, or if you need to cover that and you don't have enough to afford it, again, you have to go and get an exceptional needs payment. Again, for you to get an exceptional needs payment from the Department of Social Protection, you have to tell them why, and you have to tell them how much it is. So all of these things, like, I guess they were always there. So I was like, I'm so sorry, but I don't think I have anything new. All of the problems that were there are still there. With each and every of these barriers, and I guess maybe we can talk about it later. I'm always really keen in terms of, it's it's not fair on anyone. There are barriers to accessing an essential health service, but when you are a migrant, when you are in the asylum system, when you are undocumented, it's worse in ways that people perhaps cannot imagine. And I think that's something that I'm always very keen to talk about, because if we do it right by migrant people, if we do it right for people who are disabled or who have accessibility problems, we're probably going to make it a lot more accessible for everyone else, and that's what we want. It shouldn't be the case that you cannot access an essential health service because there, maybe you live in Castletownbere and there's only 2 buses a day, and you don't have access to a car. And again, if you're in the asylum system or if you're undocumented, you cannot legally access a driving license. If you need to travel or you need to take a train, you have to either pay it from your own money. If you're in direct provision, how much is that? And that's state-sanctioned poverty. But if you don't have that money, you have to go to the Department of Social Protection and get that exceptional needs payment and explain why is it that you need to go to a GP twice. And in some centres, they might ask you, they make the appointment with the GP. So you also have to tell your centre manager, yes, I just need to go, like, it's just so fucked up. But again, I don't think any of this is new. 3 years ago, we knew this, and I remember writing all of this in my emails to my TDs. But I guess we have to keep fighting, and we have to make it better. And again, then maybe later as well, like, I think it's not just about abortion. There are so many things that are connected. And I think in a way we are pro-choice. And I guess I would I don't ever think that someone should be forced to either continue or interrupt a pregnancy. And it goes in both ways because of how situations are and because of the conditions there. And I think in terms of reproductive justice, there are so many things that we need to unpack in terms of, you know, migrant people and migrant women should have the choice to be able to parent with dignity as well, if that is their choice. So yeah, so it's there's so much stuff there. We could be here for hours. So yeah, so that's me and my little rant at the start.
Okay, sorry. That was difficult for me to unmute. Thank you so much, Majo. It feels like the most shocking thing about what you said is that nothing has changed. You know, I feel like that's so important, and I feel like it's important to what you said, that if we make things better for migrants, we make things better for everybody. You know, it seems so simple. Anyway, I'm not going to ramble. I am going to say all the things I forgot to say at the start of the meeting before I move on to our other two speakers, which are, I think Paula is doing this anyway, but when you're not speaking, please mute your mic so that everybody can hear properly. If you have questions, we'd love to have a discussion and a kind of Q&A at the end. Throw them into the chat. The chat function is closed for everyone to see because it interferes with screen readers, but you can throw your questions into the chat and I'll ask them at the end. Similarly, we have closed captions enabled because we want these events to be as accessible as it's possible for us to make them. And if there's anything else you need to do to make this event more accessible for you as regards turning on and off your camera, whatever it is you need to do, please feel free to do it. Whatever makes you comfortable in the meeting within reason, you guys. I think that's everything I need to say. If anyone has any kind of, you know, meeting related queries, also throw them into the chat and I'll try to deal with them during the meeting. And just to say again, thanks so much, Majo. Your passion is always so inspiring to me. And I feel like this was a great start to the meeting. I'm going to move on to Louise. And as I said, like this is really a listening space, so I don't want you or Tara to feel pressure to say anything specific. I really am. I think, and we all are open to hearing everything that you guys have to say about the campaign, the work that still needs to be done, your own experiences of this activism, and literally anything else. So, welcome, Louise. Wait, hang on. Gotta unmute you. Jesus. Thank God this thing is in alphabetical order. So, are you?
Yeah, I'm good to go, I think.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was just saying I'm feeling a bit nervous now after following that. I think, I suppose, you know, when you were talking there about our experiences of the campaign, I don't think I probably took into consideration the cost that it would sort of, I think, of trying to ask for your human rights, and I suppose just to try and make a case that as a woman that you're entitled to bodily autonomy. And you know, I know friends of mine who are queer who, you know, would have had the same experience with the marriage equality referendum. But it was funny, I suppose, because I remember when I went to vote for marriage equality, like I started crying in you know, when I was casting my vote, and I was so happy, like I just felt so joyful when we got that result, whereas I felt really numb actually when, I mean, I was away, I was in the UK when the results came in, and I was surprised at that. I think I thought that I would feel, but I just think I was, which I'm sure Tara will speak a lot more, you know, on that, but just kind of really burnt out by it, which I wasn't anticipating. You muted yourself.
And now I'm unmuted.
Okay.
I've never used professional Zoom before, and the unmuting works differently. Yeah, thanks very much, Louise. Are you up for talking more about this?
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
So just I like I guess because as well, Tara, I think we'll talk about this, but like it's I think it's interesting to think about what worked and what didn't work. And I guess like something that is more and more apparent that didn't work is us minding each other and us being minded and us minding ourselves. And I know something that keeps coming up in ARC meetings. It just came up in a meeting I was in the other day where I started crying in the meeting and then we all started crying in the meeting. is that we set up all this self-care stuff and we talked a big talk about self-care, and then none of us did any self-care
Yeah.
because we were busy campaigning. And I don't know if you have thoughts about that, like how we minded each other, how we could have.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's interesting that Tara is here because I think, I didn't have personal experience. So, everything that I was talking about was in quite an abstract way, even though obviously, as a woman, particularly someone who had been very public with the fact that I, wasn't sure if I wanted to have children, like it did feel very dehumanizing to, I suppose, as you said, to have to make that case for bodily autonomy. But when you have friends who are sharing their stories, and like Tara is someone that I love very much, and I think to see the way in which she was treated, and the way in which she was torn apart, really, and the things that I saw, not just with her, but other people that have been brave enough to disclose their stories, like you never forget that.
I'm actually going to unmute Tara because I feel like she has become part of this conversation.
Yeah, sorry Tara, just like bringing you in.
Not at all.
Yeah.
No, I mean, this is meant to be a conversation, and I kind of didn't know how to structure it, but it feels like it's becoming that conversation already.
So I think it wasn't just, that like trying to do this work and, and doing the campaigning and really trying to have as many conversations as I think we possibly could, and really just wanted, I think, that sense of urgency, like, that you couldn't let up for, like, it felt like I was holding my breath for, like, all the months kind of leading up to the referendum. And then I was genuinely worried for people like Tara, that, like, seeing, I suppose, what she was going through, and, what other people were going through. It just felt like it brought out, like, this really ugly side. And I think it's one of those things now where, everything has gone back, quote unquote, to normal, but, like, you can't forget the things that were said, or, like, the side of people that was shown, or even people who were very casual about, oh, I'm not really sure, and I don't think I'll vote, or, it just, I don't know, it's very difficult to look at people in the same way after that. And I suppose, there's this sense of, you can't be a child, and you have to understand that everyone has different opinions, and and you have to be able to, I suppose, hold space for that. But it's very difficult when it comes down to, like, human rights. It feels like, well, why should human rights ever be up for discussion? So sorry, Tara, for sort of dragging you in there.
No, I think it's really, I mean, those are really astute observations, and it's something, I think, my biggest criticism, if criticism is the right word, it's not criticism, because we all work together. When people speak about this campaign, and it's often now spoken about as a political organization, one organization that near the end came up. We all know people have been working on it for decades. We all know we'd all worked on it for years. From the moment, like, I had been doing things coyly in the background, like, oh, sure, I'll host, sure, Ark, I'll host your talk, or your sure. And it was like, come on, you coward, say something, you coward. And I think with so many activists, like, I don't think many of us set out to be activists. We just go, shite, I have to say something. But once you do, the genie's out of the bottle, and that's it. And with something like this, so my particular position, everyone who disclosed, I think, was equally vulnerable in their own way, in their own situation. Mine just happened to be more public. So with the slightly more public situation, there was more aggression coming directly towards me. There was more vitriol, all of that stuff. But that doesn't mean that people who disclosed in their families didn't change things. Very, very brave to do it in that very private situation. I believe those are the conversations that change things, as we know from the polling, 5 years before the vote. So
yeah.
I think if there's any criticism, that's a long preamble, but we weren't bold enough. And that's why we are where we are with the legislation, because we did pull back. It was the over-sanitization of the actual official campaign meant that we pulled our punches. Instead of saying no, it re-stigmatized normal, everyday, for want of a better word, abortion stories like mine. It meant there was an over-reliance on heartbreaking stories, which meant there was pressure on those people to traumatize and re-traumatize themselves by sharing their most tragic situations. And it meant then that it felt a little dishonest to me, because it was like, 1 in 3 people that you know who can get pregnant will avail of an abortion. And that was the conversation that we needed to have, to destigmatize, normalize, because it's not an everyday decision to make, but it's a decision that's made every day. Mm-hmm. So we needed to talk about it. And I feel like there was a fear near the end that, oh, we're going to lose this, instead of all of us, and we don't get included enough in the conversation, away from the Dublin-centric stuff, the people having conversations around the country, the lads from Kerry for Choice, big up, you know, all the people in Roscommon, having those conversations as far away from an office as you can get. It's like we needed to hold them up by being bold and saying, this is what we're asking for. And no, the 3-day wait won't work. Instead of a kind of an appeasing thing that ended up re-stigmatizing the everyday decisions like mine. I ended up re-traumatizing the people who were forced to tell their stories. And then it meant that I feel like we weren't clear enough in what we were asking for. And it turned out from the polling, the people were already there. Why was that? Where was that disconnect? I guess that's my biggest. So, I mean, I feel like a huge imposter here because I absolutely fell apart and went away with the fairies after. I went away to Lula Land. I'm almost back. I'm not quite back. So I can't really offer anything very constructive. Very happy to answer questions, but I'm very happy to leave it to experts still involved in ARC and people like Majo, and people like Doris. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer, but I guess that's my biggest reflection.
Tara, can I ask you a question? I'm wondering, do you think that there was an over-reliance on stories? Because I can see Marie Mulholland is here, and I know that, you know, even sometimes when you go to like a summit on domestic violence and abuse, like and even in the media, there's like, oh, we really want to hear these stories, and sometimes it feels a bit gratuitous. Like it's like you're trying to get people to sort of like open up their wounds in order that you can treat, like that you can sort of take them seriously, or that you can believe their stories, or you can treat them like human beings.
Well, it becomes kind of a game, doesn't it? It becomes you're dehumanized. The minute you tell your story, which is meant to be rehumanizing, you're dehumanized because you're an issue. And then even people on side, people in your own campaign treat you like an issue. Will we use her for this? Will we not use? Is she useful here? Is she not useful here? Oh no, she's too much. This is more useful. And it becomes a commodification. Which is, and that's one of the reasons you fall apart after, because you suddenly realize I was trying to rehumanize all of us. I was trying to help by rehumanizing, and in the end, some of us got dehumanized, and it was counterproductive in some ways. And I think there's just, if I'm going to be really, really frank, as we retell these stories now and we look back on the things that worked and didn't work, and it's largely told from a party political standpoint, from a political dog, yeah, dog. But that it's people, these are people, and they're finding, and you can't just sum it up as a footnote and some women told their stories and it was useful.
Yeah.
You can't do it. That is huge cost. And I suppose I don't know if that answers your question, and I probably ranted there, but that's how I see it.
I think that's it. I suppose it's the human cost of the campaign at the end, you know. I think that maybe was the reason why so many of us felt really exhausted after it. And actually, I just wanted to touch on something that you said, Kathy, about, like, I suppose the disconnect between, you know, that this is what the polling was saying, you know, years before. What I think was really is interesting looking back is that, like, when we were on the doors, you know, it would be sort of every 2 out of, you know, 3 houses would be like, oh, we don't need to talk to you, we're voting yes, you know, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. And like, it was like we couldn't accept that as indicative of how the campaign was going to go overall. I think there was still like so much anxiety that even though what we saw on the doors actually completely bore out with the results at the, like, we nearly couldn't believe it either.
Yeah. Which I guess is trauma as well. I think it was Tara actually that said it about the polling, but Jesus, it struck such a nerve with me because I don't know if you guys remember, you probably do, when the campaign put out the alarm on their social media at about 4. I'll never forget it. We all knew this was ready to go. If the turnout was low, it was likely to fail. And they put out the alarm to say that the turnout was low, and we all I'm starting to shiver just thinking about it, and it wasn't low. The turnout was high, but they were so paranoid and we were so paranoid that, and this is, we all threw everything at it. We threw each other at it. We smashed each other against it, and then you get these polls that say, you know, everyone was on board. And what, as Tara said, what was that disconnect, and how can we make that not happen again?
Well,
I
and
don't know. That's not a question we can answer here.
Not listen to political correspondents who only pubs onto Blair Street, because they didn't know. We knew because we were having all the chats.
Do you know what? And actually, that brings me back to something I wanted to say. The speakers here, and this happens all the time with women-led activism, everybody has basically apologized for being in this meeting. Like, you guys are giving of your time for free. You didn't have to do that, but you have come onto this meeting and said sorry for existing, and I will not stand for it.
Whatever,
And it's
Kathy.
exactly, I think that, and I mean, I'm not going to, I'm only joking. I'm not blaming you. This is our culture. They made us like this. But that's when we didn't trust ourselves, you know, and as women, we didn't trust ourselves, and we didn't trust each other that the work was getting done. And I think that maybe is part of the disconnect. Something else I wanted to say just before I forget it was, like, Tara, you and I had this conversation when we were talking about having this meeting. And I think it's really important that what you said about the re-stigmatization, the dehumanization, the damage that happened to people who shared their stories. I think it's really important that we don't just acknowledge that and move on, but that we try to kind of think about what to do about that, and also how to make sure it never happens again. I was in an ARC meeting a few days ago, and Helen Stonehouse is here as well, one of the conveners of the abortion rights campaign, and I might come to her in a while because I thought there was some interesting outcomes from that meeting. But to ask you both, you three first, like, what do you think we can do about what's been done, and also how can we make sure that this doesn't happen again?
I think so. Majo, you go.
Yeah, no, I guess one of the things that I'm trying to think is I think the stigma, so much of it, I think, comes from the barriers that are there. And I think, like what you were saying, Tara, you know, like you know, we allowed us, you know, whoever sat at the table, to say yes to the barriers that are there. The barriers that are there, yes, they're awful barriers, but like it almost in letting them happen, we are allowing that stigma to stand. You know, the 3 days, the conscientious objection, the 12 weeks, that you need permission from however many doctors. You know, I think that in a way it is a signal in and of itself of the stigma that is still there to remove. You know, I think that there is an awful lot of work that we need to do as a community. And I guess that's why, you know, look, that's why it is so uncomfortable to go into the Department of Social Protection to ask for money for your bus to go to the, to the abortion clinic. You know, it shouldn't be like that, but there are so many things there. And yeah, I guess that, like, so much of what's written down in legislation and in policy, it is a physical reminder of the stigma. You know what, and I think there's, even in countries where legislation is that bit more liberal, you know, the stigma is probably the last thing to be removed. And I think that the conversations that we're having, you know, definitely, but in a way that the signals are there that we still need to work on that. And yeah, and just I just wanted to say earlier, when people talk about voting and things like that, it's like, I couldn't even vote. Like, imagine how frustrating that was. I'm Irish now, but I think that's something, and I think I'm drawing so many parallels in terms of migrant rights and racism of all the bits of the conversation that we're having. And I think those are conversations that you know, so many people of migrant backgrounds and people of color and you know, so many other groups felt left behind. And it's that bit of when you feel that someone is negotiating or bargaining on your rights and how you feel about that. I think it you know, it is replicated on other issues. So that's just a, you know, a reminder. And for anyone who says that we need to repeal the 27th, fucking remember that, because it's the people who are most affected by that amendment are the people who cannot vote for it or against it. So I think that's just a very vivid reminder that we need to have in the future when we're talking about the wider context. But yeah, like, that was fucking shocking. Like, all of those of us who couldn't even vote, it was just, you know, like, for days after the vote, I couldn't even feel that it was I did anything. You know, I didn't feel it was my win, because I could only canvas and poster and talk to everyone and emotionally blackmail every person that I found. And my best story from the canvas was like, I said it to a man in a bridge in Cork City. I was like, I need you to vote yes because I cannot vote. And he said, oh, are you not 18? And I was like, you're the nicest person ever. But you know, like, I think you know, we have to remember also about, you know, the people who are affected and were affected and had their stories and didn't even get a say in it, didn't get to say or talk about them because of that stigma. And hopefully we can the nuggets of what we're learning about this referendum, and we're talking about everything else. Yeah. And I really didn't answer your question. I wanted to say what I wanted to say. That's it.
That is what this meeting is for. Louise and Tara, do you guys want to come back in on that?
I think, Tara, were you going to say something? I think you were.
I was just gonna. You go. Mine's very brief. So
yeah. Again, I think it's just a few thoughts. Even when you were talking there about other countries having more liberal abortion laws, I thought, isn't that interesting? Because I think the message that has sort of been put out there was that Ireland was going to have the most liberal abortion laws in the world. And I think I totally believe that. I was like, wow, you know, we're so progressive, you know, this is, you know, we're going to have the most liberal laws in the world. And now, you know, as we're saying, with the 3-day wait, and like, you know, particularly living in West Cork, and I'm not even, you know, like, I'm not like living in Allihies or someone that, you know, even further down, that if you had to go to CUH or if you had to go somewhere like that, you know, it's just like 3 days apart to go see your GP twice would just be extraordinarily difficult. So I just think it's really interesting the way that message of these laws being on, and because when they say liberal, really they mean, you know, everyone's going to be having an abortion. It's going to be, you know, like that, our favorite phrase, abortion on demand. And I think, you know, again, I suppose I keep coming back to two things that you mentioned there, so I'm going to be quick now, but I think the first thing was about conscientious objection. I'm really interested. I'd love to talk to a doctor about this, because I just feel like, do you have an objection if someone came to you and was like, I need to get chemo? Like, you know, is that kind of part of your remit? I just don't see that if you've taken an oath to provide medical care, that you can sort of make decisions, like take some sort of moral ground on what medical care you will and will not provide. I just find it really disappointing. You know, particularly, you know, that like 1 in 10 GP is offering medical abortions now.
I don't know the exact figures, but I wouldn't think
I think it's 1 in 10.
And actually, just to say, don't mute yourself straight away. We've started calling it refusal to provide, which is a more accurate description. And everybody here in this meeting, please start dropping that into your. We need this to become common parlance and to replace the phrase conscientious objection, because what it is refusal to provide care, and we need to start calling it what it is.
That's
Tara,
great.
I know you wanted to say something.
Yeah, no, just to go, we've kind of moved on slightly from the initial question, but just to answer it, if I could, as briefly as I can, what can we do to prevent that sort of dehumanization, etc.? It's tricky because we need the media for these kind of very big campaigns. And one of the reasons I felt able to step up is because that was my world. That was my job and my privilege to have a platform, you know, small enough as it was bigger than many. So I was able to use that and say, look, this is just something that happened to me. And I was used to public criticism. I was used to heckles on stage, all of that, but I was not used to becoming an issue. And I think some of that, and even the tone policing, and that came from inside the house very often. I think we can prevent that maybe, because the media is always going to go tell us your story and we hope you cry. And people literally said that to my face. Like I said, I don't think I would turn down everything that was framed as a debate. I would say, I'm absolutely not doing that. I'm not even going to be in the audience. I can't. I'll just cry. And they go, that would make great radio. And you go, well, then I'm definitely not doing it. And then you're kind of going, I'm weighing this up going, okay, well, now am I turning down a chance to speak? Will they commandeer it if I don't? But I still think there's something in marking out your boundaries. and just going, no, we don't do debate. This is not debatable. I won't debate. And that was something I really stuck to. I think once you start into that kind of framing, you're accepting that. I used to say all the time, at the time, that's their pitch. We don't have to play on their pitch. We don't have to play their game at all. We don't even have to step on their pitch. And it turns out, in a weird way, you know, that was maybe a useful approach, because it's just like, no. There are actually fewer of them than their money and their media access portray. So if we just keep playing what we know to be true, what we're hearing on the, no, so ignore the political correspondence and ignore the very loud, well-funded people who are not being totally honest, and say, we're being honest, we're having the chats, and this is how it is. That might be one useful way to do it, is just not play that game. And it can be very tempting to just go in and go, well, if I don't speak today, maybe nobody will, or I have the skills to do it, I better do it. And it was sometimes just having the wherewithal to go, no, not this one. I don't know if that's useful. It was a strategy I tried to use. I still went away with the fairies, so I'm not sure. I still cried on air. So I'm not sure if that's useful, but there, some thoughts.
I got it. First of all, yes, it is incredibly useful. But I think that's so valuable what you're saying, because it feels to me that what happened was we started off, we were very overtly going to play our own game on our own pitch. Like, we were very overtly, but we got dragged in. I feel like, maybe other people would disagree with me, but it does feel to me that with the fear, you know, because the fear is real, and I wouldn't blame anybody for getting dragged in and taken over by the fear. And like, so for example, I know like ARC have a long running policy of not, and it's still, just so people know, people who don't or may not know, really still getting flooded with requests from journalists from all over the world. Do you have any stories? Anyone want to tell a story? And you know, ARC have a long-standing policy of like, no, like, fuck off. But the campaign frightened the life out of all of us, I feel like, and we left that we left that play our own game on our own pitch kind of behind. And maybe that's a thing to learn, because it became apparent too late that we hadn't had to do that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
We got scared, and how could we have had like, all of us
Yeah.
were new to this particular, like, lots of us had worked on the marriage equality campaign. This was a new thing, a new talking point, a new thing to ask people about, and we didn't have access to polls and that sort of thing. That only came out, the one about the previous 5 years, that only came out on polling day. So, you know, we got rattled, and we believed the grown-ups, and I think it's about having the confidence to know we're grown-ups.
And I suppose, to be fair, like, you know, being a woman and having been brought up in Ireland, like, fear is kind of part of our DNA. I think so much of us are unpicking a lot of like inherited trauma from the experiences that our mothers or grandmothers or, you know, great grandmothers went through. And I think it was very difficult at the time to sort of believe in an Ireland that would, I think, declare sort of with, you know, it's full chest, like, yes, we believe that women are equal to men, and that they deserve to have the same, you know, bodily rights as men do. So I think it was difficult to believe that, because history has taught us that is not true, or that was not true.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just saying to the lads earlier before the meeting got going that I was telling a woman, I'm in Iceland, everyone. I was telling a woman here today that my mother had to give up her job when she had me. She was legally obliged to, it was the law, and that person's head fell off. And I think, you know, one of the things that happened to me after the referendum was I was like, I can't believe how shit this country has been for women. It still is. You know, that realization, almost like leaving an abusive relationship, where you're looking back going, I'm sorry, we lived like that. My mother had to grow up like that. So yeah, just I can't tell you how
And
nice
that's
it is
just
to
the
be.
start of it. Because I'm like,
Yeah,
I grew
absolutely.
up, like, I grew up in a majority Catholic country as well. And people would be telling me here in Ireland, be like, South America, like, we're not like Paraguay, also, like, abortion law is like really bad as well. You know, and they'd be like, surely you were taught by nuns in your school. Like, no, I was not. And conscientious objection to contraception, not a thing. You know, it's all like, I think it's amazing. And I think I would have called conscientious objection conscientious obstruction, So it is, you know, and there is quite a bit of case law on that. It's just like, it's actual shit. Like, if someone is refusing to refer, then they're actually it's not about their conscience. It's just that they don't want you to access the service, and that's it. They're meant to be referring. That's the ethical obligation of a practitioner. Oh, fuck them. Like,
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more.
But also, I think if you okay, so let's say you know that your GP is not going to refer you for that care, and then you go. I mean, how do you go back to your GP and continue that relationship? Like, do you and tell them, like, they don't have access to like a part of your medical history now, and maybe you're afraid to tell them because of you feel that they'll judge you, or, you know, you feel ashamed. And like, I just think. Anyway, sorry, I won't rant about it, but I just, I
You're
think
absolutely right.
it's
It's
a total
ethically
failure on their behalf.
bullshit. Like,
Yeah.
I want to say lots of extreme things about you're not a good doctor, and you know what? I will, because you're not. If you're going to conscientiously object to provide care, I have zero fucks left to give really about talking about refusal to provide. It's just coming up to 1:45, and I think that 1 hour meetings are good for all of our sanities. So I kind of want to. So first of all, I just want to talk about some upcoming events, but then I'm going to go into the chat and see about questions, and like we can answer the questions, and we can also continue the chat until, you know, 5 to. So we're not all cut off mid-sentence when I end the meeting on time. So just as regards events, this is one of, oh, Paula is screen sharing stuff. Awesome. This is one of 3 events that we have planned, and there are going to be other events by other regional groups around the country too. So our second event is going to happen on the 1st of July at 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. because we're trying to kind of stagger the time so that different ones suit different people. It's the graphic on the left. It's Rebels, Reactivate, Repeal 2. And we thank Lucy Boland for the fabulous poster making work that she's doing, and also all of the amazing Rebels for Choice work, Lucy. And you can see our guest speakers at that event are going to be Bridget Carmody from the Cork Traveller Network, Gillian Kearns from Disabled Women Ireland, and Karen Sugru from Together for Safety. And we'd love to see all of you at this meeting. I think if there's going to be a series, it'll be nice to see how the conversation evolves. And that we're all listening to each other. And so speaking of Karen, Karen is kind of one of the cornerstones of Together for Safety. And Together for Safety is an organization that was set up in the middle of last year, I feel like, kind of specifically to address one aspect of the review legislation, which is these safe access zones that were promised to us. The old traditional name for these zones is buffer zones. Again, the language, you know, we're using language that more relates to what's actually happening. Buffer zones around hospitals are there to make it illegal for anti-choice protesters to harass and abuse and threaten women and pregnant people who are entering hospitals and clinics to access abortion services. And like, as it turns out, any services, because if they're there, they're going to traumatize you. We don't have those. They were promised to us at the time of the referendum, and it's been 3 years, and we still don't have safe access zone legislation. And protests are still happening outside hospitals. If you follow Together for Safety on their social media, you'll see their coverage of protests. They have a survey that lets you give them information about protests, where they are, what's happening, the kind of protests. So they're trying to build a kind of database, and they're having an event tomorrow at 7 p.m. and you can see, if you go to their social media, you can find a form to sign up for the event. There's 4 speakers and they'll be talking about safe access zones, and they'll also be talking about the legislative review. Then we have a third event, which is going to be on July 14th. The time is yet to be decided, because we're going to see how the turnouts are for both of these events and see which time suits best. And the speakers will also be to be decided, but we have one confirmed speaker. It's Mika Nelson, who again was a absolute pillar of the Cork Together for Yes campaign, and is a trans activist and one of the lead climate activists in the climate campaign in Cork as well. So he'll be fabulous, and I hope you all tune in for that as well. So now, if you want to stop the screen share, Paula, we'll come back and I'll just check the chat and see about questions, and then we might just continue talking for the remainder, if that's okay. Hooray that there's not loads of questions. But also ask questions, put questions in the chat. Because the chat function to everyone is turned off because it interferes with screen readers, you won't see your question coming in, but I'll see it. So the first question is, what tactics or strategies do the panel think would be useful to mobilize public support for more positive changes about this supposedly resolved issue? I feel like that's good phrasing there. And there was a second question that was very like that as well, like, because so many people are burnt out. The question is, what can we do to rile up those people? And that is how I used to talk about it too. But also, let's talk about how can we keep each other sane and also manage to keep doing this work? Because as we said repeatedly after this referendum, you can never stop. You can never stop pro-choice activism. You can never stop. So how can we keep going, I guess, is the question. And how can we make sure that people are able to participate in this ongoing activism?
I think, just to come back to the very first point I made, be bold. We need to be bold. And instead of worrying about scaring people, sort of allay their fears, explain. So often in the talks, it's like the things that people were saying, don't bring up X or don't bring up Y, it frightens people. And it's like, no, it doesn't if you explain it. And I think it really is about, be very frank, be very clear. I remember a lad, I was doing a talk at a college, and he was going, I just don't know. I said, I'm trying really hard to get past my prejudices, but I just don't know if I could really vote yes when there could be abortions at 8 months. And I said, it's really, really hard being pregnant. And I started from there. I said, you don't get to 8 months unless you really, 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 really want to be or able to be. And I said, unless something really terrible goes wrong, and how tragic is that? And then you really need the care at 8 months. Like, I just explained it in terms of a real person. And he actually went bright red, and I felt sorry for him, but it was like, he just hadn't thought about it. He had just accepted a talking point instead of going, what would the situation be where you would get to 8 months and then just go, can't be bothered anymore? And it's like, which was what he had in his head. And to see that that would be incredibly rare, if ever, incredibly rare. And that's not what we were talking about. I just think if people are afraid, hold their hands, explain, but let's be bold and let's say what we mean. Let's not pussyfoot about. I think that's where these 3 days, all these sort of little caveats, which have kept us in stasis, I think that's where they come from.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point.
I want to echo Tara there. Like, sometimes what I do, especially when it comes to like things that affect migrants as well, is to, like, I just explain it step by step. Because people sometimes, not out of malice or anything, but they don't necessarily think things through. So I might tell them, okay, you need to get a PPS number. Okay, if you're undocumented, that means you have to go to the Department of Social Protection. That could mean A, B, C. When you go to the doctor, or if you're in a direct provision center, and sometimes I say, look, and the problem here, it's not only the abortion law, but it's also direct provision. But it's like, if you are having an abortion, or if you're miscarrying, you might be bleeding heavily. How would that feel on a long bus trip? How would that feel? How does it feel if you have to travel and you're living in a congregated setting and you just disappear for a few days while you go to the UK to get your abortion? How does that work now? So sometimes it is about really, really painting the picture and going step by step and saying, and this is how the problem works. If there's only one GP in Alahis, that means that you might have to go to Bantry, to Castletownbere, to another GP if there's a conscientious objection. So how does that look in terms of driving, taking a bus? If you have children, and this is one, like, if you have other children and people who have abortions, some of them are already parents, who do you leave them with if you have to travel, or if you have to travel from I'm going to say Skull to Cork City, because you don't want people to know that you've had, like, what's the childcare situation there now? If you're in an abusive relationship, how do you explain to your partner? And I think it's just spelling it out. It can work, and that's how we might get rid of it. And like Tara said, be bold. Like, we have to ask for the star of the moons, like, because that's what's fair and that's what's right. Yeah.
I think that was so beautifully put, because even when you were asking all those questions, I was thinking, God, I didn't think about that. And I think that's going to be really crucial, because I do think there is an element of, after the referendum, because it was so contentious, people being like, I really don't want, and I'm talking about like normal people who are not involved in the campaign, who were just like, I don't want to think about that anymore. I don't want to have those conversations anymore. They really kind of wanted to put it aside. And I suppose it's just trying to get the momentum back and putting that in, I suppose, just bringing that back into the cultural conversation that we're having right now. And even like, I was just thinking of my own column, and I was like, I wanted to ask you to like say all that slower so I could write that down, because I think that is it though. I think trying to put it in terms that people can relate to, because once you start asking those questions, I think it really brings home just how untenable this situation is.
If I may as well, I think that's a really good solution to the other problem we were talking about women having to share their own stories. If you make that person put themselves in the shoes of somebody who has to do it, you don't have to tell a harrowing story of somebody who's already gone through it. And it means that, you know, women aren't going to have to, I thought the phrase commodify themselves was really apt. But yeah, no, I think that's a really good way of doing that without having to subject women to that.
But also, can I just say as well that I think, be frank, but also I am so done with being polite. I think our politeness just killed us. Like, how fucking dare they? How fucking dare Simon Coveney insert a 3-day waiting period as if it fucking affects him? Ugh! So like,
go off, Doris.
Yeah, but honestly, like that's a huge part of why we're all still wrecked and still shiver when we see a fucking neon pink like jacket or something. Like, how dare they? They're so infantilizing, they're so dehumanizing. They took so much from us, and we were afraid to say, okay, that's not really it, because we want to just be really kind and compassionate and caring. Fuck off.
Yeah. Next time he needs healthcare, we'll make him wait 3 days. Let's see how that works out.
Yeah.
That was exactly what I was going to say as well.
Yeah. One thing about kind of like the other thing about kind of like keeping the momentum going, and maybe this is because of my transnational, like I've been through a few countries, and you know, I was also like in a super liberal place like Canada. Like, the fight never stops. You know, like we can never, and I think, and I'm so sorry, and I know everyone's exhausted, but the thing is, you don't just win your rights or vindicate them, or there's always room for backlash and for rights to be taken away, or for policies to come in, and we can see that in so many progressive places. So that's why it's really important that, you know, we're just aware that we will have to keep up the fight. We will have to keep up this, you know, it is about autonomy. It's going to be about many other things. I think we need to book one about like migrant barriers, just to say, you know, because I had a list, but like it's never going to stop. And you know, like my Argentinian sisters, they had actually really good legislation in Argentina. They had really good case law. They had cases that went all the way to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. But the problem was, at the local hospital in North Argentina, near Paraguay, the doctor wouldn't provide it. So, you know, when we're thinking about legislation, when we're thinking about policy, you know, in the end, and that's why I always focus about, it's how it's felt on the ground. We can have beautiful things written in paper. Paper will hold anything. But it is how it's being felt by the people who need the service, and by the people who are facing the barriers. So I'm so sorry, but it's never going to stop. And that's why it's so important that we're minding each other.
Yes.
But yeah, sorry, it's going to go on forever. Yeah.
I think that's exactly it. Like, we have to take care of each other, because we're all burning out and falling on the floor, and that's not going to work if we live like a 40 to lifetime year fight ahead of us. It's 3 minutes to go, so I'm just going to have a quick read through the chats, because there's a couple of nice comments as well. There's a lot to be said about the positive impacts the campaign had as well. Like Tara said, bringing people out of their bottles, there is no putting us back in. I think we just had an excellent demonstration of that. And Holly Cairns has commented too, and I just want to kind of thank Holly for coming, because I know how fucking busy you are, and thanks a million for coming and taking part. And she says, I would hard agree with people having to tell their story. I wonder how we could ensure that those who have needed terminations for medical reasons don't have to tell their stories again, as well as ensuring the legislation changes to prevent them from having to continue to travel, which of course they are still doing. Yeah. I would love to hear thoughts from speakers on this at 3 minutes. Do you guys want to? I think that's kind of, it's kind of a pivotal thing we keep coming back to. How can we make this not happen again?
They should never travel, and that should be the hard line. No one should ever travel, because some people cannot travel, and that just means they won't be able to access the care they need. So we're just going to have to, like Tara said, we have to go for what we want and not scale back. No one should be forced to travel. And
I do think we will all be fighting forever, and it is a pendulum, as we know. Rights tend to be a pendulum, so it swings to progressive and it swings regressively again. Not just that it swings, there's an active push to push the pendulum back again, and we will experience that here. But I think, yeah, being bold and exactly as Majo says, like the rising tide lifts all boats. No one should have to travel. It has to be, healthcare has to be local, because then you're covering all the people who need all different kinds of access. So a barrier to one is a barrier to all at some point. So I think it's sort of, yeah, what Majo said covers it all. Listen to Majo.
We can even say, you know, what if there's a pandemic? People can't travel during pandemics.
Yep.
And that's, we can fucking say that it's true now, because it's like, you know, made it fucking it's outrageous. But it was like, how the fuck do you travel during a fucking pandemic, you know? And that just made it clear again, you know, no one should ever have to travel.
Do you know something I want to say about before I forget it is Northern Ireland, don't forget about, like, lads, follow the Alliance for Choice.
Yeah. And if we were really good in terms of protecting the rights of migrants and not requiring a PPS number and not looking at ordinarily residents, we could have provided for our sisters here, because I think that was part of the thing. You know, it's like, oh, anyone can come for abortion tourism. You know, like, no, lads, it's not. You know, it's not the Temple Bar. Again, if we provide for the people who are most vulnerable, we will be including, you know, if undocumented people can access abortions, that's going to mean that people who are here either by accident or because they're in the shared island and they cannot access it because of their own politicians, you know, they're going to be able to access this essential care. And, you know, look, it's only right that Ireland can, you know, I guess give back in terms of everything that's been given in terms of the services in other countries. So again, it all goes back to, we'll fight for it, yeah.
And speaking of positive things, before you wrap it up, I'm sure, Kathy, but just ye all rock. And I'm so grateful for everything you've all done and continue to do. So just thank you.
Also, you rock, and everybody here, like, I just to overtly say, I hope people know, like, everybody who's taken time to come tonight, we're fucking awesome. And as somebody said in the comments, there's no stopping us. We just need to make sure to mind each other. And I personally feel very minded by this event, even though I was hosting it. So, like, I guess more of that. Just 2 comments that I wanted to come back to. In the chat, somebody was saying a fact sheet about the review would be useful. And actually, if you go to the Abortion Rights Campaign website, freesafelegal.ie, there's awesome fact sheets. They do really, really good graphics. It's all very accessible and easy to understand. And there'll be tons of information there about the review, and share that information. Keep telling people, just like at the start of the campaign, just make it a conversation thing. And then another person commented that a guarantee for people, like, and this, I guess this is what these conversations are about, like, how do we make sure people going into other campaigns or other situations like this won't stay the hell away because they know what happened last time. Like, I think we need to keep having these conversations to make sure that our campaigning is safe for everyone and sustainable. I've gone 1 minute over. I broke my promise to myself, but I'd love to come back to all 3 of you for just final words before we log off.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for asking me. I felt like this was really inspiring. I actually feel really kind of excited to sort of start getting back into this again. So thank you for asking me to take part.
Thanks for being here. Fantastic.
I want to say thank you to all of you, especially to you, Kathy, for all the organising, but also for all the chats over the years when I was in a hole and you were in a hole, and we were all in a heap, together. And we're kind of coming out of the heap now, I think, which is great, because it was a shit heap. But what an achievement that we all did. And I think the achievement really is meeting each other and knowing the power we have collectively. And that's an incredible thing. So we can definitely keep each other going.
Nice. Thank you, Tara. Thanks so much.
And I just want to thank everyone. Like, it was an accident that you invited me, but look, I'll take it with all of these legends. Look, I guess I want to thank you for having me, but I guess as with everything, you know, my thing would always be like, look, let's look at abortion rights, absolutely, reproductive autonomy, but, you know, we have to look at reproductive justice, and the right to bodily autonomy is about making choices on in both ways, and it's about the the choice to be able to terminate a pregnancy if that's the right thing for a person, but also to continue with it and to parent those children with dignity, safely, in communities where we can support them, where they have safe housing, where they won't be deported, where a disabled parent will have the supports and the healthcare that they need to either continue with a pregnancy or not, or parent their children safely or without them being taken into care, because so I guess let's keep that in mind, and I guess this is such a part of the larger conversation. We cannot isolate it from the rest, and so like, look, we'll keep fighting on so many fronts, and migrant rights and everything else, but I thank you, every one of you, for everything that you are doing, you have done, and you will be doing over the next few months and years. Thanks.
Couldn't have said it better, Majo. Before, because you reminded me about the National Maternity Hospital campaign, everybody please look it up, follow the social media, get involved. Speaking of reproductive justice, we need to own our National Maternity Hospital. Thanks a million, everybody. I feel fantastic after this. Like, yeah, it's been an absolute privilege. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Majo. I hope I see loads of you at the next event on the 7th, on the 1st of July. God, the 1st of July, I'm sorry. And follow Rebels for Choice, follow the abortion rights campaign, get involved, and I'll see you on the road, and we'll mind each other. Bye, everyone.